Welcome to the Universe Podcast. Um, Today is April Fool's Day at the time that I'm recording it. But we have not been having a very fun time. Actually, I've been frequenting Twitter because what else am I going to do? And we have all resolved as a collective to not celebrate because this year it's been something. It's been like a whole punch. We've had almost World War III breakout. A beloved athlete has passed away. People are suffering from the coronavirus and the coronavirus pandemic. And it's been something. It's been quite a year. Cats came out in December. That was the beacon for what this year was going to be out. Just like a whole catastrophe. I apologize for my corny jokes, and also I apologize for the fact that I'm now recording in my room because of social distancing and not being in a formal studio. So hopefully you can forgive for whatever quality we may be. We're all trying to get through this together. There's also going to be, if you're listening to this on Spotify, there's also going to be a video component to this on YouTube. So be sure to check it out because I'm using Zoom, as we are all using Zoom during this time, to record a couple of slides to go along with the presentation today. Because today is the quarantine edition. We'll be having a couple of mini episodes of individual podcast hosts just talking about a certain topic that may or may not be related to the current coronavirus pandemic. So I opened up talking about April Fool's Day, and actually that ties perfectly into what you will be listening to me talk about because I have no one else to talk to here. But talking about humor as a way to cope, as a coping mechanism. So I'm a big fan of escapism. Escapism being using some other media or form or whatever else does not work to sort of escape from responsibilities, roles, to escape from disaster, sadness, dealing with some of the horrors or traumas of your everyday life or everyday experience. And we've all done escapism at some point, whether that's going on a YouTube binge and going down a whole of like YouTube videos of cats or cats hitting oranges or Animal Planet videos, or for some reason you find yourself looking at RuPaul Drag Race compilations, and then ever since then you can't help but say, I'm acting. I highly recommend looking at some of those. If you've never seen Drag Race, I have never seen an episode of Drag Race, but they're very entertaining. The reads are very interesting. I quite enjoy it. But again, I've never seen the show. How do I get onto a YouTube binge of watching compilations of Mimi I'm First? As it's helpful. It's helpful during this time because what else are we going to do? There's also TikTok memes. TikTok, that's what the kids are doing nowadays. Do a couple of TikTok dances to some TikTok songs. Also, Netflix Tiger King has been a big thing, I guess, a big phenomenon. I think essentially at this point of the podcast, I'm just giving you recommendations to escape from things. And also, speaking of that, this right now, maybe listening to me can be a form of escapism. And escapism can be exactly what we need during this time frame, using coping mechanisms to deal with some of the ways that we're socially disconnected from one another. So social distancing has been in effect. Some people are undergoing self-quarantine. And let's try and distinguish between self-quarantine and social distancing. So self-quarantine is really staying inside. There's no going out to the grocery store or anything. You may have have the illness. And so staying indoors is the way to quarantine yourself from other people so that other people do not, or you're exhibiting signs of the illness, or you've been confirmed to have coronavirus. And so self-quarantine is the way to prevent spreading it to the outside world. But so is social distancing. Social distancing ways to help prevent the spread of coronavirus. Because some people, for example, maybe you might have heard Idris Elba he tested positively for COVID-19, even though he doesn't exhibit any symptoms. So some people may be a carrier of the virus. And to say something else about coronavirus, it's some people are saying, like, it's like the flu, like, what's the big deal? And no, it's a lot more contagious than the flu, and there's no vaccine for it. We encourage people during flu season to get a vaccine to help prevent the spread of it. So to say, like, and people die of the flu as well, you all. Like, that's why they say get a vaccine for it. But this is a novel virus. It's something that we have not been exposed to before, as opposed to spreading. The flu virus can spread to maybe 1.3 people. The coronavirus can spread to 3 people at a time. It's that contagious, and it's, as you've heard, especially detrimental or those who are elderly, those who may be immunocompromised, those who are incredibly young, or what have you, are most likely to feel the effects, the health effects of the virus in morbidity or mortality. And that's something that social distancing is to help prevent. All of us in the United States and other places beforehand. China's at this point just now kind of opening up again. But all of us are using social distancing to stay away from one another, only going out for essential items, only having essential, in quotation marks, essential workers out and about. But I'd like to stress that social distancing is really more of a physical distancing. There was a movie that came out maybe a couple of years ago. It had Cole Sprouse, the twin that's on Riverdale, who used to be on Zack and Cody. Cole Sprouse, he was in a movie called 5 Feet Apart that really demonstrated the social distancing that has to be an effect or physical distancing that has to be an effect for people. We're all encouraged to be 6 feet apart from one another, because that's like the distance for, if you are sick, it's a safe distance to not catch whatever illness you may have. So a stressor in that this is not necessarily, we're not necessarily not allowed to speak to one another, to communicate with one another, to interact with one another. It's a physical distancing. It's a focus on physically staying apart, because in this time frame, being socially related to one another is going to be incredibly necessary. So just to go off of that, the effects of social isolation can be very much detrimental. In my research for this episode, I found a research study that had monkeys, and they separated monkeys from each other, and they did it for different time frames. I had one group that was separated from the rest of the tribe of monkeys. I don't know what a band of monkeys is called. I feel like they're the monkeys. That's a band. That was a punny joke for me. The monkeys. What song did they make? They made did they do it's me and you and me, no matter how you toss the dice. Okay, let me stop singing, because that's not what you're here for. But the study looked at monkeys, and they separated some of them for 3 months. And while these monkeys were in isolation, they did fine. But once they got back into the general population of monkeys, they had a shock. They had a shocked reaction to being back in place with other monkeys, because they suffered, as the researchers said in the study, social anorexia. And the shock of interacting again was had an effect on their systems, on their biological systems. On top of that, they were able to, those in the 3-month group were able to adjust over time, but those who were socially isolated even longer really suffered when trying to go back to the rest of the group. Other research in social epidemiology suggests that the absence of positive social relationships is a significant risk factor for broad-based morbidity and mortality. The nature of these social relationships and the mechanisms underlying this association are of increasing interest as the population gets older and the healthcare costs associated with chronic disease escalate in industrialized countries. And going off of that, that's for us as people. And it's interesting that in a more urbanized world, a more urbanized landscape where we're in large cities where we're all compacted with one another, people still feel loneliness. People still feel desperate from one another because we're in a society, a capitalistic society, that prioritizes functionalism, prioritizes working, prioritizes seeing goals and ends, and not necessarily, it doesn't reward community. It rewards individualism, but how do you feel like an individual when you have no one to interact with? It's like a strain of being in a highly individualized space where you feel invisible. So you lose your individualism and you also lose that community. And according to a 2018 national survey by Cigna, loneliness levels have reached an all-time high, with nearly half of 20,000 US adults reporting they sometimes or always feel alone. And 40% of survey participants also reported they sometimes or always feel that the relationships are not meaningful and that they feel isolated. And being alone doesn't necessarily mean you have to be lonely, but loneliness, you can feel loneliness while being in a crowd. And so with these questions of social isolation and the effects that social isolation has on us, what about when we're now quarantined and forced to be away from one another? And in a study or in an article by Science News called Social Distancing Comes with Psychological Fallout, they found that many quarantined individuals experience both short and long-term mental health problems, including stress, insomnia, emotional exhaustion, and substance abuse. For instance, one study compared quarantined versus non-quarantined individuals during the equine influenza outbreak. Of 2,760 quarantined people, 34%, or 938 individuals, reported high levels of psychological distress, which can indicate mental health problems such as anxiety and depression during the outbreak, compared with 12% of non-quarantined individuals. And that's quoted directly from the article. So, as mentioned previously before, this social recession, as a Vox article put it. You can read the Vox article. I thought it was very interesting. It came out, I think, March 12th, and it speaks about a social recession, and it defines it as a collapse in social contact that is hard on the populations most vulnerable to isolation and loneliness. So who are these populations that can be most vulnerable to isolation and loneliness? Well, one, the elderly. As you get older, some of your friends may move away, get new lives, and also pass away as well. So your or whatever kids you may have are growing up, living their own lives, so you feel, the elderly feel a heightened sense of, studies indicate they feel a heightened sense of loneliness. And so being forced to not interact with one another can have effects on them, as well as how we interact in this day and age is also through technology. And if you're not technology savvy, you may not be able to interact with other people, as well as if you don't have access to technology or internet. As we see during this time frame, everyone has to have Zoom calls and this, that, and the other. But if you don't have access to great technology or great internet access, interacting with other people can be really difficult. If you're not able to pay your phone bill because you just lost employment, interacting with other people can be difficult. And I like to say that social isolation is something that a lot of people feel daily, as I shown, but also the most marginalized people, maybe those in prisons or those who suffer chronic illnesses, and again, the elderly and those in lower classes or the poor, really face social isolation and the effects of that the most, as well as, I don't know if you've noticed, but all these populations overlap with the populations who are most likely to feel the harms of the coronavirus the most. As far as health effects, again, the immunocompromised, the elderly, as well as those who do not have access to healthcare, those who don't have access to be able to get paid sick leave, and for those in prisons, being in a tight population, higher effects for, or a higher chance of contracting the coronavirus. So not only are these populations susceptible to the economic recession or the economic effects of the coronavirus, not only are they most susceptible to the health effects of the coronavirus, but they're also susceptible to the social and psychological effects of COVID-19. So with all this said, what do we do? How do we find a way to get our social juices flowing? Well, as the phrase goes, laughter is the best medicine. But appreciate my jokes. I'm here by myself. I hope you laugh. I'm trying my best. Funnily enough, I'm actually I'm not a comedian, but I'm on an improv team, but I'm not funny. I don't know how I was able to get on there. No idea. I think it's my chaotic energy and willingness to go with the flow, but I'm not funny, y'all. I'm sorry. I'm sorry it's April Fool's and I can't provide you any jokes, but that's why I highly recommend watching RuPaul's Drag Race. There's lots of great moments in that. Watch some YouTube, go on a binge. Great cat videos out there in the world. And that's how laughter and humor works in the more modern age. But laughter or humor as a form of medicine or coping skills is definitely not new. And, we go back to the Greek tragedies, of course, but also the Greek comedies where people put on masks and make fun of different deities or people or whatever else may have you, like kings and rulers, as well as jesters and the Middle Ages putting on costumes and making fun of the king. There's ways that comedy has often been used to point out discrepancies in life and to sort of make light of the sad times. Having a jester in the Middle Ages, I wonder what their jokes were about the Black Plague. And this theory of humor, of like what makes something funny, is called incongruity theory. And an incongruity theory says it describes humor as an enjoyable experience of a mismatch between what we expect and what we experience. So often we may find ourselves laughing at something that may be a little taboo, on edge, and you're like, you don't know why this is funny, but it may just be a mismatch between what you expected and then what actually happened. And that humor is occurs pretty often in kids shows. So like when you're younger, like I definitely remember Lilo and Stitch. Lilo was doing the dances, and then Myrtle says some whack stuff to her, and then Lilo beats that girl up. That's a key memory in my life. I'm thinking of Lilo and Stitch often these days because I rewatched it lately, and I'm like, just the jokes between Stitch eating Pleakley's head and their makeup being on. I highly recommend watching Lilo and Stitch again, or any other childhood movies. Again, all throughout this podcast, there will be recommendations to escape life a little bit. But incongruity theory is one way to doing this mismatch between humor is one way to be able to cope with things. There are a lot of discrepancies and a lot of mismatches in our life right now. What a lot of us may have expected for this year or for this time frame has been completely or most likely has been altered in some way. And so finding the humor in this mismatch is something that can be done. Other things that have been maybe more frequent these days is satire and parodies, and sort of making fun of the ways that maybe the governments have handled this crisis. For example, something also, another recommendation, if you have not seen Italian mayors telling their residents or citizens of their town to stay inside, highly recommend. Very funny. You can find it on YouTube. There's one, and it made me love the Italian language, thank goodness. And there was one guy who's like, we will, if we see you having a party, I can't do an accent, let me not do it. See you having a party. If I see you having a party, I will send the cops to your house with flamethrowers. And it's like, whoa, it's that, like that flipping around that expectation and how different that may be from other places, and the energy that Italian mayors are giving to their residents as opposed to something over here in the United States, or wherever it may be. So that can be quite funny, and it's, again, satires and parodies. If you ever had to read any Voltaire in high school, like, they're nothing that's new. It's been a way to cope or handle incongruities in life for a while. My favorite, or like the example that comes to my mind when I think of laughter as a coping mechanism is Chandler Bing from Friends. He always had a joke. Again, Friends, great show. If you want to escape for a little bit, go on a whole binge. It's just something you could turn your brain off and watch, and I enjoy that. Unlike Frasier, great show, may have to have your brain on for a little bit of it. I don't know if you can hear my mother in the background. She is yelling at my dog. This is what happens when you're inside the house. So another example of incongruity theory is gallows humor. So in this time frame, the people who may have like the sickest, darkest Black humor are those who work a lot with dead bodies and dead people for some reason. Why? Perhaps because you have to find a way to cope with the disasters and death and trauma that you're always around. So ER nurses are going to have a whole lot of material in the next few months. Not right now because they're going through the stresses, but doctors, healthcare workers, I'm going to be very interested in hearing some of the jokes that they got out of this. And I hope that they're laughing through the pain of it all. And this theory of using humor as a coping mechanism, as using humor as a therapy, was first started by Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl created a therapy called logotherapy, and it's a therapy that focuses on clients finding meaning in their lives. Logo in logotherapy means meaning. It means finding meaning. And Frankl, when it came down to meaning, he was thinking of existential meaning, and it could refer to existence itself, being alive, the meaning of existence, the meaning of being alive, and the striving to find meaning in personal existence. Frankl said that to live is to suffer, and to suffer is to find meaning in the suffering. One moment, I apologize. So Frankl was thinking about this form of therapy prior to being sent to a concentration camp during the Holocaust. And during his time there, he later spoke about in his memoir or his narrative, Man's Search for Meaning, about how he was able to find a way to survive by looking for hope and looking for the future. For Frankel, survival meant being reunited with his wife, being back with his family, and going back to work and continuing his work. He found that on a daily basis, he was able to utilize humor, and that was the only weapon he had against the reality of a situation and threat of death. And after surviving the Holocaust, he was the first to promote humor and therapy. And he believed that humor enabled an individual to gain the fullest possible control over themselves. Being able to, being able to create a joke allows you to relieve some energy and to reframe the situation in a way where you're not the center of the problems, but you can find a glimmer of hope in the problems. And again, I like to say doing this is difficult. It's incredibly difficult to be in a horrific situation such as that and to find a way to hope. To hope requires action. It requires a lot of faith, and it requires a lot of faith in the future. And humor, like we think like just making jokes is something that can happen so easily, and maybe for some people it can, but really requires an action and a way of thinking and a framing of that. So it's powerful, and there was a fear of the weapon of humor also during this time with the Nazi regime. Anti-Nazi humor that directly criticized Nazis, was once labeled asocial, and people were sent to concentration camps frequently if they told jokes. And a former Nazi prosecutor said, "The better the joke, the more dangerous its effect, therefore, the greater the punishment." Again, let me say it. The better the joke, the more dangerous its effect, therefore, the greater the punishment. So if you were a fire comedian, you got punished, and if you needed more evidence that Nazis sucked, besides a whole plethora of evidence for why Nazis suck, think of it in the fact, if you got a fire joke with your friends, you would be the one most likely to suffer a punishment. And that's just pathetic, really. Awful. Terrible. Sucky. Nazis suck. Universe Podcast approved slogan. We'll say that till the end. Nazis suck. Not just for them not liking fire jokes, but for, again, plethora of reasons. So that's one way of combating humor. Humor, knowing that humor can be a powerful way to criticize and to highlight and to point out discrepancies in people's narratives and people's motives. But we also know that humor can be used to hurt and to harm other people. If you watched any Disney Channel specials back in the day, you know, there'd always be that bully that would say some whack joke about, "Oh, are you poor?" Like the writing on that, it's like the jokes. Can I even think of a significant joke that a bully ever said on that? Because the bullies were always like there's no mistake. This is bully. Look at them. They wear dark clothes. They pushed. They're mean. What's their motives? Who knows? But often we know that humor to hurt other people can have various different levels. We know within our friend group sometimes, you know, you tease, you josh someone, you make fun, but it's all within agreed context and an agreed contract. And when humor is used to devalue, to illegitimize, to provide justification for harm, it takes a more cruel approach. And humor in this way has often been used as a bonding purpose to legitimize harming other people. People can come together and make fun of someone else because they're insecure and to have themselves feel better. And again, in this place, it's also a coping mechanism. It's a way to react to your own fears, use humor to make someone else a straw man and to make someone else look bad. And we have an example of this during this time frame. I mean, when we think about humor used to hurt, I think sometimes of maybe Dave Chappelle and Ricky Gervais and some of their jokes that have been used against LGBTQ people and have been offensive to that community. But I also think during this time frame, during the coronavirus, the jokes against a certain group, a certain national or ethnic group, in the United States, it's Asian American people. Or Asian people in general, jokes that have been used against them, even within the White House, off the record. And President Donald Trump used a term for the coronavirus that referenced a certain national group. And it's supposed to be, it's a joke, or it's, I have this justification for it and this, that, and the other. But I'd like to say, put it out there, that this theory, again, of humor as a coping mechanism, humor to make us not to focus on discongruities, but humor used specifically to make us feel better, is called superiority theory of humor. And I like to highlight and emphasize that humor is not contextless. You need to have context to be able to understand certain jokes. For example, if someone had been in a bunker 25 years and just came out, and you had a vine of, I'm trying to think, what is my favorite vine? Okay, maybe you can understand some Vine style context, but if you had like a meme, so many memes have evolved from when I was in elementary school. So many memes, you would need a whole lot of context to be able to understand what is being said here. If I said, the cat can have a little salami as a treat, if you didn't understand that, you didn't understand that, and you have to look it up to get context. Humor is not contextless. It provides, there's something in the real world that is tied to and is based to whatever jokes that you say. And as we know, humor is powerful, or else people would not want to suppress it. So when President Trump later says, well, we don't want there to be any violence against Asian American people here, it's a bit too late. There's already been news and articles of Asian American violence rising in the United States, especially in the course of the coronavirus. There have been people who are saying, I'm not going to a Chinese restaurant, I'm not doing this, that, and the other, despite the virus not being tied to a race or an ethnicity. Yes, the virus first began in its epidemic phase in China, but that does not mean that Chinese people, there's an essentialist argument between a virus and a certain class of people. That virus has been in Italy, Spain, and here in the United States, and it's affecting and harming everyone. So there's no reason to have an essentialist argument between there. Yet, humor, I have seen some memes that sort of justify or make light of or pick fun at Asian American people during this time. And that's one thing to think about, humor as a coping mechanism. It should be focused on ourselves and should not be focused on other people. For example, again, this year has been wild. In the beginning of this year, there was worries about potential conflict with Iran, and there were people making jokes about going into World War III, and there was an argument about, you can make these jokes here in the United States when you're not actually going, while there's other people in other countries whose lives really are on the line and who really have to suffer. I'll point out another recommendation of some comedy you should see, Cat Williams. Cat Williams is my favorite comedian, just because I watched him in my childhood. And there is a great joke about him talking about what is the Iraqi uniform. I would have you look that up on YouTube. But these jokes, yes, they're used to handle potentially some anxieties, but there's someone on the brunt of these jokes. And if someone has to be a victim of the joke, is it really funny? And others argue like, yeah, but I think there's a way to be more creative that doesn't have to involve punching down on people, but rather, again, going back to incongruity theory, flipping the script, looking at a mismatch between those who are in power and those who are not. And that's sometimes called in social justice spaces and outside of it, of course, as punching up. So I would like to highlight a comedian. Her name is Christina Wong, and she's Asian American, I believe. And she, of course, uses her identity in her jokes as well to sort of pick fun at the stereotypes that are placed upon her and flipping it on its head, but also using humor to talk about more serious topics like depression and mental illness. And during one of her shows, she was speaking about this, and they found afterwards that people in the audience, of course, laughed, and also decided to seek out mental health resources for themselves. And that's one of the greatest strengths of humor, is the ability to change dark, sad, awful situations and flip them on their head to think like, wow, yeah, that is pretty ridiculous. Or wow, yeah, that is a great point. And using it as a motivator, using it as a way of opening our mind, using it as a way of reflecting on different things. Again, I think back on Cat Williams, and Cat Williams talking about, I'm thinking of Tiger King also right now, Cat Williams talking about a tiger in a cage and being like, all day, that tiger's just looking like, I don't feel like a tiger. Am I really a tiger? Oh, I haven't done any tiger things in a while. And then all of a sudden someone like comes down into the tiger exhibit, and the tiger attacks and lunges, and then he's like, then the tiger got shot. Why the tiger got shot? For just being a tiger. And it said, I highly recommend watching the rest of that clip to see sort of his broader message in that humor. And again, Dave Chappelle was also like really good at using humor to highlight social inequities. Boondocks has also been very good. Again, giving you those recommendations at highlighting some of the disparities in humor. Some of the disparities in society, and using jokes to be able to highlight that. And laughing is great. It's a great way of feeling better, of feeling relieved. Laughter releases hormones like endorphins, which make us feel good. And if you want like the strongest testament to endorphins, like when women or whoever gives birth, and then like endorphins are released after, like they have a whole baby infant going like out of their bodies in extreme pain, and then they still look at that baby and want to have another. Why? Endorphins. Endorphins are released. No, I'm not. This is not a Dr. Oz endorsement of using endorphins instead of like any other forms of medication. Do not throw your medication away and decide to become the Joker and laugh at everything. No, that's not what we're advocating for. We are advocating to having some fun and using laughter as a way to do that. Endorphins interact with opioid receptors in the brain to help relieve pain and also trigger feelings of pleasure. the value of social connection is tied into our own nervous system. And it relieves these things, and they found in evidence that it's a glue. Laughter is a glue in social bonds and social interactions. It helps to, laughing with one another helps to feel bonded to another person. You may have also noticed this if you ever flirt with someone, you find you laugh more often than usual. Social laughter is an important pathway that supports formation, reinforcement, and maintenance of social bonds between humans. And that quote comes from Professor Lauri Numeneha of the University of Turku in Finland. So to, again, provide some of the arguments here, humor helps it by reframing our way of thinking, by not having us be in the center of, or like the egotistic protagonist of the world, but flipping it and making us kind of humbling ourselves and placing ourselves in a way that, things are broader than just what we may be experiencing. Humor helps to relate stories of inequities and harm and trauma, and using it to relate to other people. It provides a way to get that social clue and not have to be so worried about being perfect or great, but being able to relate with one another and making jokes and making light of a situation. Humor humanizes by highlighting discrepancies, inequities, injustices. It shows some of the flaws in systems and helps to relate to the victims of those systems. So laughter, joy, hope, it's key to our survival, and it's key to our health. The stresses of being alone, the stresses of not having forms of happiness or social interaction are really detrimental to our health overall. Like stress, if you don't stress, is a biggie. Like we all think like, whatever, like I can get through stress. Or maybe not all of us think that, I know there maybe there's a medical professional listening like, I never thought that. And okay, great, good for you. But for lots of people in a society that, again, rewards us to keep going and keep pushing forward, you sort of lessen the effect that stress and lack of sleep can have on our bodies. But they do have an impact. They have an impact on like our digestive system, our sleeping, our skin. Being able to like relieve some of our stress in our lives, and laughing as a way to relieve some stress can be really beneficial. So having said that, I guess I'm advocating for you to make a TikTok, do some TikTok dances, contact people, and make some new friends. Maybe contact an ex. Why not? What are they gonna do? They can't. What are they gonna do? They can't see you. So, what? Actually, no. That's a joke. Don't do that. Please don't do that. But talk to someone. Talk to anyone. Call someone. Have a FaceTime with someone. I watched a movie over Zoom with someone, and that was nice. There's also a Google extension called Netflix Party. So you have Netflix, you can share it with other people, and or someone else is on their Netflix, whatnot, and then you do the Netflix Party extension with a link, and you're able to watch a movie on Netflix at the same time. You can pause it, that and the other. It's great. It's really good. Yeah, you have a chat feature that you can go through. I do recommend that. And to give a quote from the great racial theorist Mark Twain, I'm being sarcastic, but one thing that he did say that I think is great to highlight is humor is mankind's greatest blessing. And I don't know if everyone listening believes in blessings, but I think I agree with this. I think there's a lot of use in being able to laugh. I don't know how many times I've fallen and have had to laugh at myself, or watching someone else trip and then, you're okay, cool, let me laugh at you. It's a way to leave things loose in the line. So having said all that, do you want to say social distancing or physical distancing is important? It's incredibly important for our healthcare workers and the healthcare system. And it, with the load of people who are coming in, and also to prevent that load of people from coming in, to prevent the illness from being, those who are, most susceptible to catching the illness, the elderly and immunocompromised and all that, but also for anyone and everyone who can contract this. This is a necessity. It's a necessity, and it's a necessary sacrifice to make. And it's also been incredibly disruptive. And it's okay to acknowledge both of those, that this is necessary and also hard. It's hard. It's not normal. It's definitely not going to be the new normal. It's been disruptive to people's work. Some people have lost employment. Some people have had plans. Summer plans have been canceled. Education has been disrupted, removed. Work life has been hard for some people. Those who are already dealing with mental illnesses, depression, may feel that be more heightened the time and focus on being completely alone. And it's okay to mourn a loss of things that could have happened. It's okay to feel sad and confused and disappointed and hurt by all of this. And give yourself room to feel that. Give yourself room to mourn that loss of a normal life, or maybe you have to mourn something else, unfortunately. It's okay to feel. It's okay to feel sad, angry. And once you're able to process that, excuse me, I sneezed, and to go through that, it's okay to laugh. It may be good to laugh. It may be even necessary to laugh and to stay in and go on a Tiger King binge or a Disney Plus binge or watch Frozen many times throughout the day. It's okay to do that. Don't feel bad. Don't feel like I'm not being productive. You are being productive. Being able to have fun is productive. It's good for you. It's good for your mental health. Talking to your friends is so good for you. Enjoy that. Do that. You should not be punished from that. It's necessary for you. Have fun. Have fun. At least as much fun as you can have during these experiences. And stay versed. That concludes this podcast, but it does not conclude the rest of this discussion. If you have any questions or comments, you can feel free to email us at theuniversepodcast@gmail.com. Again, that is theuniversed, UNIVERSED, podcast@gmail.com. And you can also follow us on social media. We're on Instagram and Facebook under the same name, Universe Podcast. And you can just have any questions, comments. If you have any recommendations for things that you would like us to know, we're great with that. If you just want to give updates for how your life is going, we'll read all of it. We'll read it all. And if you want to rag on my awful humor, you can do that as well. But the important thing is to stay sane, stay, well, as much as you can, stay healthy, and stay versed.